The Omega dismissal was supposed to take 20 minutes. Every year, after the mating presentation at the Palace of Valdoria, the Alpha King's court processed the unbonded Omegas the way they processed paperwork, efficiently, without sentiment, without looking too closely at the faces. The Omegas, who had not been chosen by a noble, were thanked for their attendance, given a small parcel of coin, and escorted to the southern carriages that would return them to their respective villages. The Alpha King, Lord Rowan Blackmere, had attended exactly 4 of these dismissals in his reign. He had never watched a single face. He was not watching now either. He was standing at the far end of the receiving hall, with his back half turned to the proceedings, studying a map his first general had laid across the war table, his attention on the northern pass where enemy scouts had been spotted 3 days running. Around him, his court performed the choreography of dismissal without him. His chamberlain reading names, his stewards directing Omegas toward the southern carriages. The slow, shuffling departure of 50 women who had spent 3 months preparing for an event that had taken less than an hour to conclude without them. He did not need to watch. It ran itself. Myra of Thornwick, Senna of the Eastern River Valley, Lyra Ashwood. The names moved past him like water past stone. He traced the northern pass with one finger, calculating distances, calculating time. Vesna of the Commons, no house affiliation. He did not look up. His wolf did. It was not a dramatic thing, not at first. There was no snarl, no lunge, no violent assertion of instinct that he could have acknowledged, addressed, and suppressed. It was something smaller and stranger than that. He simply noticed, somewhere in the region of his chest, that he had stopped breathing. He stood very still. His wolf sat down. Not figuratively. Not in the poetic language that wolf-blooded men sometimes use to describe the sensation of an instinct asserting itself. His wolf, the vast, ancient, profoundly unreasonable creature that shared his body and his blood and answered to no logic he had ever found, simply stopped moving forward with the proceedings and sat down in the center of his chest like a stone dropped into still water, and refused. Rowan kept his eyes on the map. The name came again. Vesna of the Commons, this is the final call. He turned his head. He could not have said why. He told himself afterward that it was the phrase "no house affiliation" that had made him glance, a bureaucratic irregularity that any administrator would have noted. He told himself it was professional reflex, the habit of a king who paid attention to things that didn't fit. He told himself many things later that were not true. What actually happened was this. His wolf sat down, and he turned his head, and he saw her. She was not the most beautiful woman in the room. She was not the most striking, not the most expensively dressed, not the most polished product of noble grooming. She was standing at the back of the departing line of Omegas, a single worn travel bag over one shoulder, her dark hair braided back with the kind of ruthless efficiency that spoke of a woman who had not had help dressing herself in years. Her dress was clean, but not fine. Her shoes were mended. She was holding the small parcel of coin the stewards had given her, and looking at it with an expression that was not gratitude, and was not defeat, and was not the careful blankness that 3 months in a royal palace sometimes pressed into women who had arrived hoping for more. She was looking at it like she was doing arithmetic. She was calculating whether it was enough to get home, whether it was enough to last until she found work, whether it was enough to cover the debt her village elder had told her this trip would generate if she returned empty-handed, which she was now going to do, and she was already working out the numbers, and her face was very still, and her jaw was set, and she was going to walk out of this room, and she was going to be fine, because she had clearly been fine through worse things, and she was not going to let any of these people see her be anything other than fine. His wolf, in the center of his chest, made a sound like a door being barricaded from the inside. The Chamberlain made a small note on his list. Dismissed. Rowan spoke. He did not plan it. He would think about that for a long time afterward. The way the word left him before any conscious decision had been made. The way his wolf had apparently decided that thinking about it was not something they were going to do today. Wait. The word was not loud. It was never loud. It carried the way his voice always carried, on something that was not volume, but was something underneath volume, and the room heard it the way rooms always heard him, with an immediate, instinctive stillness, the way prey animals freeze at the sound of something they cannot see but know to be very large. The Omega at the back of the line went still with everyone else. Then, slowly, she looked at him. Brown eyes, steady despite everything. Not searching, not hoping, just looking. Like she was trying to determine whether weight had been directed at her or someone near her, and was going to determine this through evidence rather than assumption, because assuming things had apparently not served her particularly well in the past. He said, "What is your name?" His Chamberlain made a small distressed sound somewhere to his left. The Omega said, "The Chamberlain just read it." The room went several degrees more silent. Rowan looked at her for a long moment. His wolf, in his chest, did something that felt disconcertingly like sitting up straighter. "He did," Rowan agreed. "I was occupied. I am asking you to repeat it." Something shifted in her face. The arithmetic paused, replaced briefly by something more wary. She had the look of a woman deciding whether to be insulted and whether she could afford to be. "Vesna," she said. "Of the Commons? You heard the rest." "I did." He studied her. She held his gaze without difficulty and without performance, which was interesting, because most people found sustained eye contact with him approximately as comfortable as looking directly at the sun. "Who sent you to the presentation?" The wariness intensified. "My village elder." "From Thornwick?" "From Ashford." He filed that away. "Why did you come?" The Omega called Vesna appeared to consider several answers to this question and discard all of them. She settled on. Same reason the other 49 did. They came hoping to be claimed by a noble. "Yes? That is not why you came." It was not a question. He could smell the distinction, the careful ambition of the other Omegas, the way they had moved through the presentation like people hoping for a specific outcome. This woman had moved through it like someone completing an obligation. Like someone who had been told to come and had expected exactly this, and was now calculating the arithmetic of getting home. She looked at him for a moment with something that was not quite hostility and not quite respect, and might have been both simultaneously. "You don't know why I came." "No," he said. "I am asking." Another calculation. He watched her run it. He watched her decide, apparently, that it didn't matter anymore what she said, because she was dismissed and going home, and he was still a king, and the answer to what he could do about anything she told him was probably nothing, so honesty was essentially free. "My village is in debt," she said, "to a Lord Aldrich of the Northern Territories. Elder Bram told me that if I attended the presentation and was claimed by any noble, any affiliation, any house, the debt would be forgiven under the Omega Honor Clause." She paused, just barely, and then said it plainly, because she was apparently done softening things. "I was not claimed. I am going home. Elder Bram is going to be very disappointed." "And are you disappointed?" Rowan asked. Vesna looked at him. I am doing arithmetic, she said. It takes precedence over feelings at the moment. Something in his chest loosened and then immediately tightened again, which was not a sensation he had experienced before, and which he did not entirely know how to categorize. His wolf was very still, attentive, focused in a way that was not predatory, but was adjacent to predatory in ways that made him profoundly uncertain about what was about to happen. He said, Your name carries no house affiliation. No. Your parents? Dead. No performance around it, just a fact she had long since stopped flinching at. Omega designation is rare without house registration. How were you designated? She tilted her head. There was something in the motion that was sharper than deference, a precision about it. The way someone moves when they are used to having to prove something they should not have to prove. Village Healer administered the test when I was 12. Elder Bram registered the designation with the district records. A beat, slight, controlled. I know what you're implying. The records are accurate. He had not been implying anything. He had been asking because he was curious and because his wolf was sitting in the center of his chest, like a stone that had grown roots, and because something about the way she answered questions made it difficult to think about the Northern Pass or the enemy scouts or anything that was not this woman standing at the back of the dismissal line with her worn bag and her mended shoes and her relentless, infuriating arithmetic. I am not implying anything, he said. He heard his chamberlain make another small sound, different from the first. This one carried an undertone of alarm. I am asking you to stay. The room absorbed this. Vesna absorbed it differently from the room. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has heard something and is carefully reconstructing it to ensure they have not misheard. Because the thing they appear to have heard does not make sense, and she is not the kind of woman who jumps to conclusions that do not make sense. The carriages for Ashford depart in 20 minutes, she said finally. They do. I have a bag packed. I can see that. I was dismissed. I am undismissing you. Something sparked in her eyes. Brief, controlled, quickly banked. Can you do that? I am the Alpha King. I can do most things. That, Vesna said carefully, does not answer the question. He looked at her for a long moment. Behind him, he was aware of his court. Every wolf in the room completely still, completely silent, completely oriented toward this exchange with the concentrated attention of people watching something they had never seen before and suspected they would never see again. His chamberlain appeared to have stopped breathing. His first general had let the map roll itself back up. There is no rule, Rowan said finally, that requires me to send you away. There was no rule requiring you to keep me either, she said. Until 30 seconds ago, you were going to. Until 30 seconds ago, he said. I thought I was. It was the most honest thing he had said to anyone in months. It landed in him with a kind of quiet violence, the way true things sometimes do. Not with noise, but with weight. Vesna looked at him for a long, measuring moment. Why? She said. He did not have a good answer. His wolf had an answer. Simple, absolute, unreasonable. But translating that into something this woman would accept as a legitimate reason was a task he was not yet certain he was equipped for. He looked at her and was aware, with unusual clarity, that anything that sounded like flattery or politics, or the easy reassurance he could have deployed without effort, would be received like a stone thrown at glass. He said, I don't know yet. Another beat. She was doing arithmetic again, but different arithmetic this time, not about coin. That is not a reason, she said. No. That is not even an explanation. No? You are asking me to miss my carriage, give up my only method of getting home, remain in a palace where I was just dismissed along with 49 other women, and you are offering me, I don't know yet. Yes. Vesna looked at the coin parcel in her hand. She looked at the door the other Omegas had already passed through. She looked at him with eyes that were doing something more complicated than arithmetic now, running some internal calculation he could not quite follow, some measurement of risk against some other variable he could not name. She said, "What are the terms?" Something in him relaxed infinitesimally, not because she was agreeing, she hadn't agreed to anything yet, but because she had asked the right question. Terms, conditions, rights and limitations. She was treating this like a negotiation and not like a gift, and that told him things about her that were somehow more important than everything she had told him about herself deliberately. He said, "You may leave at any time. I will arrange transport to Ashford whenever you wish it. Your village's debt to Lord Aldrich is dissolved as of today. I will have the dissolution papers prepared before evening. You will have private quarters, full access to the palace kitchens, and you will not be required to attend any court function you do not wish to attend." She was watching him with narrowed eyes. "And in exchange?" "Dinner," he said. "This evening, with me. An hour, 2 at most. You can leave immediately after." The silence that followed had a different quality than the silence before it. The room was still frozen, but it was frozen around something it didn't understand, and that misunderstanding was beginning to generate a particular kind of heat, the kind that forms when people are witnessing something unprecedented and don't yet know what to do with the witnessing. Vesna said, "That is an extraordinarily disproportionate offer." "Yes. You are dissolving a legal debt, providing private quarters and full board, and arranging transportation across the realm in exchange for one dinner." "Correct." "That makes no sense." "No," Rowan agreed. "It does not." She looked at him. He held her gaze. His wolf sat in his chest and breathed, slow and steady and absolutely certain, the way his wolf was almost never certain about anything. "All right," Vesna said. The debt dissolution papers were on his desk by the 3rd hour of the afternoon, signed and sealed with the Alpha King's ring, which Vesna held in her hands for a long time in the small sitting room adjacent to the quarters she had been assigned, before placing it very carefully back in the hands of the steward who had delivered it. She did not trust herself to grip it too tightly. It represented too many things that were not hers, and should not be hers, and were hers now regardless. And the arithmetic of that, the arithmetic of receiving something she had not earned and had no framework for, was the most complicated calculation she had yet attempted, and she was not certain of the answer. Her quarters were nothing like what she had been given during the 3 months of the presentation, which had been fine but functional, the chamber of a guest rather than a resident. These were different, not larger. She was still an Omega of no house affiliation, and no one in this palace had yet determined what to do with her, but different in character, as though whoever had arranged them had been given instructions she could not quite decipher. The hearth was lit despite the mildness of the evening. There were moonflowers on the table, white petals open in the low light, which no one had put in any other Omega's quarters during the presentation. The linens were the good ones, heavy and soft, and there was a tray of food that was not the symbolic small meal of a guest being managed, but the substantial tray of someone who was expected to be hungry. She ate all of it. She had learned a long time ago not to leave food she was given. Her wolf was doing something quiet and strange. She was not a wolf who experienced her animal self in dramatic ways. There had never been anyone in her life around whom her instincts had sharpened or surged, and she had come to the quiet private conclusion that the designation was perhaps a bureaucratic artifact, that the village healer had tested her and found something dormant and registered it in good faith, but that dormant might simply mean absent in her particular case. She was reconsidering that now. There was a thread, faint, thin, new, in the region of her sternum. She could not have said when it had formed. She could not have said with certainty what it meant. But it was there in the way that things are there when they have always been there, and you simply have not noticed them until the moment you cannot notice anything else. She dressed for dinner carefully, in the best thing she owned, which was not particularly fine, but was well kept. And she braided her hair the way she always braided it, practical, without fuss, and looked at herself in the mirror without performing either hope or resignation at her own reflection, because she was very tired of performing things at herself, and went to dinner. He was already there when she arrived. She had half expected not to be taken seriously, to arrive and find a courtier or advisor standing in as proxy, to be managed and processed and sent home in the morning with the debt dissolved and a polite note about the Alpha King's very full schedule. She had constructed this expectation carefully, as a wall in the afternoon, because expecting disappointment was cheaper than experiencing it. He was there. He was standing at the window when she entered, not sitting in performance of patience, but genuinely at the window, looking out at the palace gardens where the moonflowers were opening in the dark. And he turned when he heard her and looked at her in a way that made the thin thread in her sternum pull, just slightly, in a way that was nothing like pain but felt adjacent to it. There were 2 places set at a table that could have seated 20. Someone had arranged this thoughtfully, had understood, apparently, that intimacy is not created by candlelight and good china, but by proximity, by 2 people able to see each other's faces, by a table small enough that speaking at normal volume is possible. She sat. He sat. She waited. He poured the wine himself. This was so unexpected that she stared at the motion for a moment before her face could smooth to neutral, and she looked up and found him watching her with an expression she could not categorize. Something between careful and intent, and something she did not have a word for. "You expected someone else to do that?" he said. "You're the Alpha King." "I'm aware." A pause. "I am also capable of pouring wine." "I didn't say." "You thought it." She considered denying this. "What made you stop the dismissal?" she asked instead. He looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was very defined in the low light, all angles and controlled stillness, and his eyes were a color she had thought was simply gold in the receiving hall, but was more complex than that up close. Pale at the center, deepening toward amber at the edge, like something burning very steadily at a temperature she could not gauge. "My wolf," he said. She absorbed this. "Your wolf stopped the dismissal." "Yes." "Your wolf has never done this before?" "No." She looked at him. He looked at her. The thread in her sternum pulled again, slightly, steadily, in the direction of him. She was very aware of it. She was very aware of the fact that she was aware of it. "That's concerning," she said. Something moved in his eyes that she thought after a moment might have been amusement. "Yes." "You don't know me." "No." "You have no reason to keep me here." "My wolf would disagree." "With respect," Vesna said carefully, "your wolf doesn't get a vote in my life." The silence that followed this was very quiet and very full. Rowan set down his glass and looked at her with an attention that was not threatening, but was total. The complete, undivided focus of something very large that has noticed something very small and found it unexpectedly interesting. "No," he said. "That is correct. It doesn't." He paused. "That is why I told you the terms. That is why you can leave. My wolf has an opinion. What matters is whether you form one." She looked at him across the small table, in the low light, with the moonflowers visible through the window behind him. "I'm forming one," she said. "I know." A pause. "What is it saying?" She held his gaze for a long moment, aware of the thread in her sternum, aware of the arithmetic she could not yet complete because she didn't have all the variables, aware of the fact that she was sitting across from the most powerful wolf in the realm and was not afraid of him in any way that had yet proven useful to her. "It's saying I need more information," she said. He almost smiled. She saw the edge of it, caught and controlled before it could fully form. "Then ask." "Lord Aldrich of the Northern Territories," she said. "Why does my village owe him a debt?" Something cooled in his eyes. Not at her. She could read the distinction clearly, the difference between coldness directed outward and coldness that was simply recognition, the expression of a man who has just been handed a thread he recognizes from somewhere else in his life. "The Omega Honor Clause," he said. "You know it. It's how the debt was structured, yes. My elder explained it to me." "Lord Aldrich has been using it," Rowan said, with a flatness that carried the shape of something much colder underneath. "To acquire women for his household from villages that cannot pay other debts. He has been doing it for 4 years. I have been building a legal case." She looked at him. "How close is the case?" "Very close." His eyes were steady. "The dissolution of your village's debt is legitimate. The Omega Honor Clause does grant the Alpha King's discretion, but it will also be, when the time comes, one piece of a larger action." "You were going to dissolve it anyway," she said slowly. "At some point, as part of the case." He did not answer immediately. She watched him weigh something, watched him decide, watched him land on honesty the way a man sometimes does when he is determined that nothing else is going to work. "I might have," he said. "Eventually. Not specifically your village's debt, not specifically tonight, not specifically because—" He stopped. "Not specifically because of me," she finished. "No." She looked at the thread in her sternum. "So, the debt dissolution is real?" "Yes." But it was accelerated. Significantly. She picked up her wine glass and held it for a moment without drinking. "Because your wolf sat down." "Because my wolf sat down," he agreed quietly. Something in this landed differently than she expected it to. She had been trying to determine whether the debt dissolution was payment for something. Transaction, management, the tidy bureaucratic processing of an Omega who had become inconvenient by being noticed. She had been trying to determine whether to be grateful or suspicious or both, and how to assign proportions to each. She had not been expecting him to be honest about it. She had not been expecting him to tell her that something had moved faster for her specifically, not because she had done anything, not because she had value he was accounting for, but because something in him had sat down and refused to move, and he was apparently the kind of man who, when that happened, opted for honesty about it rather than constructing a story that sounded better. She was recalculating. "Tell me about yourself," he said. The shift in register was gentle enough that it took her a moment to register it as a shift. He was not commanding, he was asking, and the asking sounded like someone who had just made a decision. Quiet, without announcement, a door opening inward rather than being pushed. "There's not much to tell," she said. "You said that the way someone says it when they mean the opposite." She looked at him sharply. He met her gaze without apology. "My parents died when I was 7, she said. "Fever. I was raised by the village community. No single guardian, just the collective, which meant I was everyone's responsibility, and therefore no one's priority." She paused, brief, steady. "I learned the healer's trade from the old woman in Ashford, who had no apprentice and needed one. I have been keeping the village records since I was 15, because no one else bothered. I can set a broken bone, deliver a difficult birth, calculate yield projections for 3 kinds of grain, and negotiate a supply contract with a traveling merchant in under 4 minutes. He was watching her with that total, undivided attention. I came to the presentation, she continued, because Elder Bram told me it was the village's best chance, and because it was the only thing I could do. I did not expect to be claimed. I was not— She paused. I was not hoping to be claimed the way the other women were hoping. I was hoping to be useful. Those are different hopes. Yes, he said. They are. A pause. Which did you prefer? She blinked. What? Being useful or being claimed? He looked at her steadily. Which would you have preferred if you could have had either? She opened her mouth to say that this was the kind of hypothetical she didn't entertain. That useless speculation about preferences she couldn't afford was something she had trained herself out of years ago. That she was a practical woman, and practical women did not sit around imagining. Being claimed, she said. She heard her own voice say it and was surprised by it in a way that was not entirely comfortable. He looked at her with gold eyes and said nothing for a long moment. Not by anyone specific, she said quickly, because honesty had apparently become contagious, and she was not sure how she felt about that. I was not hoping for a specific person. She stopped, started again. I am very tired of being responsible for everything, she said finally. I am very tired of being everyone's practical resource and no one's priority. I am 23 years old, and I have never in my life had anyone who thought about me first. The arithmetic, she realized distantly, had stopped. The thread in her sternum was pulling steadily now, in the direction of him. That is not a thing I have ever said out loud before. He leaned forward slightly, and she was aware of the heat of him across the small table. A warmth that was not the hearth and not the wine, but something she had no category for. You told me, he said quietly, because you have nothing left to protect by not saying it. Yes. That is what I did too, he said, when I stopped the dismissal. I had nothing left to protect by pretending I wasn't going to. She looked at him. He looked at her. The thread in her sternum was no longer thin. It was not yet thick, but it was pulling steadily, anchor steady, in the direction of something she had not allowed herself to name yet because she was still doing arithmetic and the arithmetic was not done. I am still going to leave if I decide to, she said. I know. The transport offer is real. It is. And you won't— She looked at him carefully. You won't interpret my staying as agreement to anything I haven't agreed to. Something in his jaw tightened, very briefly, in a way that told her the question was not offensive but was important to him, that the distinction mattered to him, that someone had perhaps not made that distinction for him before, or he had not made it for someone else before, and was very conscious of it now. No, he said. Vesna, staying is staying. It is not a promise. It is not a contract. It is not agreement to anything except being here. He paused. If you want more than that, you'll have to tell me, and so will I. She held that for a moment, turned it over, checked it for flaws the way she checked every calculation. It held. Then I'm staying tonight, she said. We can revisit tomorrow. He almost smiled again, and this time she saw more of it. Not a full smile. Nothing so unguarded as that, but the edge of something warm, something that didn't get much exercise, but was apparently capable of existing under the right conditions. Tomorrow, he agreed. Tomorrow came, and the day after, and the day after that. She did not calculate anything during those days, which was unusual for her, and she was aware of the unusualness as a kind of weather. Strange and notable, not yet categorized as storm or sun. She learned the palace the way she learned everything, methodically, without sentimentality, mapping its corridors and its politics and its inhabitants with the same systematic attention she had applied to supply contracts and yield projections. She learned that the palace kitchens opened at dawn, and that the cook kept a private supply of dried apples she was willing to share with anyone who asked, without performing entitlement about it. She learned that the Royal Library had a section on border law that was more comprehensive than anything in the district records, and that she could use it, apparently, simply by walking in and reading. She learned that Rowan moved through the palace with a stillness that was more careful than it appeared, that the measured quality of his movement was not merely discipline, but something he maintained actively, a continuous act of restraint she could read now that she was looking for it. She learned that he was funny, occasionally, in a dry, devastating way, that he seemed genuinely surprised by himself. She learned that he kept every commitment he had made to her in the first hour she had known him, without drama, without requiring her to notice. She noticed anyway. The thread in her sternum deepened. By the third week, she could find him in the palace by the thread alone. She did not try to, not deliberately. She simply noticed, walking back from the library one evening, that she knew he was in the eastern wing, that she knew without having been told or having any ordinary information to that effect, and that this knowledge had a quality to it that was different from simple awareness. She did not say anything about it. He knew. She could see it in the way he looked at her sometimes, in the fractional shift of his attention when she entered a room, in the way his wolf was visible in him occasionally. The gold in his eyes intensifying, his movements briefly more deliberate. The careful restraint becoming momentarily visible as restraint rather than as naturalness. He was holding himself at whatever distance she set, and she could see the cost of it, and that seeing was doing things to the arithmetic that she had not accounted for. In the 5th week, she walked into the library in the middle of the night because she could not sleep, and he was already there. He was at the window, not reading, looking out at the garden where the ancient oak stood against the winter sky. She stopped in the doorway. He turned. The thread between them pulled tight for one moment, not in discomfort, but in something adjacent. Recognition, she thought, or the shape recognition makes in the chest just before it becomes something more. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "Neither could I." She crossed the library and stood beside him at the window. The garden was very still. The oak was enormous, ancient, visible from half the palace, and she had looked at it many times in the past weeks and found it comforting in a way she could not explain. Its mere permanence, a kind of argument against the impermanence of everything else. "How long has it been there?" she asked. "Longer than the palace," he said. "Longer than most things." "Does it have a name?" "No, it is just the oak." "It should have a name," she said. "Things that have been here that long should be acknowledged." She felt his attention shift to her, the quality of it changing. And she did not look at him because she was looking at the oak, and because she thought if she looked at him now, she would not be able to finish what she was starting to feel capable of finishing. "I have been thinking," she said, "about the arithmetic." He waited. "I have been trying to calculate this," she said. What this is, what it might be. I have been trying to determine the variables and assign proportions and reach a conclusion I can justify through evidence." She paused. "I have failed. The calculation doesn't close." "What's missing?" he asked. "I keep leaving out the part where I want to be here," she said, "because I have never wanted to be somewhere before, not specifically. I have been somewhere because it was practical, because it was necessary, because it was the only option. I have never stayed somewhere simply because She stopped. I keep forgetting to include it, because I forget sometimes that it counts. Very quietly, he said, "It counts." She turned and looked at him. He was close. She had not realized how close, standing at the same window in the same library, at the same impossible hour. Both of them awake, for the same reason neither of them had said out loud yet. His eyes were pale gold in the dark, steady, and the thread in her sternum was no longer pulling. It was anchored deeply in both directions, and she could feel that he felt it too. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I don't know how to—" She searched for the word and found it. "I don't know how to want something and accept it at the same time. I have never had practice." "Neither have I," he said. "Not at this. Not specifically. You are the Alpha King." "I have commanded armies," he said quietly. "I have ended wars. I have governed a kingdom for 11 years, and I have never once—" He stopped, and she saw the thing she had been watching for, the moment of genuine, undefended vulnerability, the crack in the controlled perfection of him, where something true lived. "I have never had anyone in this palace who looked at my coin parcel like they were doing arithmetic, who asked me what the terms were, who told me my wolf didn't get a vote in her life." "You needed that?" she asked. "Apparently," he said. "I needed to know that you weren't here because you were afraid of what would happen if you weren't. I needed to know that if you stayed because you decided to." She looked at him in the dark library, with the ancient oak beyond the window and the thread between them resonant and real. "I have decided," she said. "I keep deciding, every day. This morning, I decided again." He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said, "May I—" "Yes," she said, before he finished. He raised one hand and touched her face, very gently, with the back of 2 fingers against her jaw. And she felt the heat of it everywhere, not just where he touched her, but through the thread, lighting it like a lamp lit from the inside. Warmth cascading through her sternum and into her chest and down her arms, and she heard the sound he made, low and barely contained, the sound of his wolf finally permitted to say yes. She leaned into his hand. He exhaled. "I have been sitting very still," he said, "for 5 weeks." "I know," she said. "I could see it." "Was it—" He stopped. "Did it help? The distance?" "Yes," she said honestly. "It told me things. It told me you were capable of it, that you could want something and not take it." She paused. That was the variable I was missing from the arithmetic. He looked at her with gold eyes in the dark. "Did the calculation close?" "Yes," she said. The answer settled between them like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting a long time. He was still holding her face with that careful, almost reverent gentleness, and she was leaning into it, and the thread between them was humming now, warm and live and real, the way her wolf had apparently been trying to tell her something for 5 weeks without her knowing the right language to receive it. "There is something I have to tell you," he said. "The mate bond," she said. He went very still. "I worked it out 3 days ago," she said. "The thread. The way I can find you in the palace. The way I feel it when you're in distress during the war council. Not the content of the meetings, just the edge of your stress, pressing through the connection like a tide coming in." She looked at him steadily. "I am a village Omega with no house and no special knowledge of court custom. But I have been a healer for 9 years, and I know the difference between ordinary attachment and something ancient happening in my sternum." He searched her face. "Are you—" "I am not afraid," she said. I want to know what it means, what it asks, what we would. She paused. I want to know before anything permanent happens. Because I said I would require information before opinions, and I am holding to that. Yes, he said. He lowered his hand, but she caught his wrist and held it. And something moved through his face that was not quite relief, but was the shape relief makes when it arrives somewhere it did not expect to be welcome. Tell me, she said. He told her. All of it. The mate bond, its stages, its permanence, what claiming meant and what it did not mean, and the difference between the two, the way it would settle between them if they chose it, and the way it would not disappear if they didn't. The way his wolf had known in the receiving hall, while he himself was looking at a map and thinking about the northern pass, and believing himself to be a sensible person, making sensible decisions about an unremarkable situation. She listened to all of it. The claiming is a choice, she said when he finished. Yes. Not just yours. Never just mine. She was quiet for a moment, holding his wrist in the dark, the ancient oak behind the window, the warmth between them steady and patient. Not tonight, she said finally. But not never. Something in him settled, deeply, visibly, the way a man settles when something he has been carrying for a long time is gently, carefully, placed down without breaking. Not tonight, he agreed. She looked at him. You sat down, she said. Your wolf, in the receiving hall. You said it sat down and refused to move. Yes. And you turned around. Yes. Because of that, because your wolf decided. Because my wolf recognized something, he said quietly, that I had not yet had the sense to look for. She thought about this for a moment, about the word recognized, about the difference between choosing and finding, about the fact that he had stood in a receiving hall with his back turned to 50 women being dismissed, and his wolf had sat down in his chest like a stone, and he had turned around, and she had been standing at the back of a line doing arithmetic and not hoping for anything. Your wolf has better instincts than you, she said. Significantly, he said. She almost laughed. She felt the edge of it, a real laugh, the kind she rarely had, the kind that requires genuine surprise and genuine ease, and the conviction that being found funny is not a debt that has to be repaid. Thank you, she said, for turning around. Thank you, he said, for missing the carriage. She held his gaze for a long moment in the library, with the thread between them warm and real and unhurried, and she thought about the woman she had been in the receiving hall, practical, arithmetic running, expecting nothing, protecting herself from the cost of expecting something. And she thought about this, here, now, and the calculation was still closed, and it was still correct, and she was still deciding, and she was going to keep deciding. Every morning she woke in this palace until deciding became simply being. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, he agreed, and the day after. Outside, against a sky going slowly from black to deep blue at the edge where dawn was beginning to feel its way in, the ancient oak stood in the garden exactly as it had stood for longer than the palace, longer than most things, permanent in the way that things are permanent when they have already survived everything that tried to move them. The wolf at her door did not scratch or whimper. He did not demand. He simply lay down across the threshold of the library, large and warm and patient, and breathed the slow, deep breath of something that has been running for a very long time and has finally found the place it was always trying to reach. The thread between them hummed. Inside her chest, her wolf lifted its head for the first time in 23 years. And Vesna of the Commons, no house affiliation, arithmetic completed, decided again. Because my wolf recognized something, he said quietly, that I had not yet had the sense to look for. She thought about this for a moment, about the word recognized, about the difference between choosing and finding, about the fact that he had stood in a receiving hall with his back turned to 50 women being dismissed, and his wolf had sat down in his chest like a stone, and he had turned around, and she had been standing at the back of a line doing arithmetic and not hoping for anything. "Your wolf has better instincts than you," she said. "Significantly," he said. She almost laughed. She felt the edge of it. A real laugh, the kind she rarely had, the kind that requires genuine surprise and genuine ease, and the conviction that being found funny is not a debt that has to be repaid. "Thank you," she said, "for turning around." "Thank you," he said, "for missing the carriage." She held his gaze for a long moment in the library, with the thread between them warm and real and unhurried, and she thought about the woman she had been in the receiving hall, practical, arithmetic running, expecting nothing, protecting herself from the cost of expecting something, and she thought about this, here, now, and the calculation was still closed, and it was still correct, and she was still deciding, and she was going to keep deciding. Every morning she woke in this palace until deciding became simply being. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed. And the day after. Outside, against a sky going slowly from black to deep blue at the edge where dawn was beginning to feel its way in, the ancient oak stood in the garden exactly as it had stood for longer than the palace, longer than most things, permanent in the way that things are permanent when they have already survived everything that tried to move them. The wolf at her door did not scratch or whimper. He did not demand. He simply lay down across the threshold of the library, large and warm and patient, and breathed the slow, deep breath of something that has been running for a long time and has finally found the place it was always trying to reach. The thread between them hummed. Inside her chest, her wolf lifted its head for the first time in 23 years. And Vesna of the Commons, no house affiliation, arithmetic completed, decided again. "I have commanded armies," he said quietly. "I have ended wars. I have governed a kingdom for 11 years, and I have never once—" He stopped, and she saw the thing she had been watching for. The moment of genuine, undefended vulnerability. The crack in the controlled perfection of him where something true lived. "I have never had anyone in this palace who looked at my coin parcel like they were doing arithmetic. Who asked me what the terms were? Who told me my wolf didn't get a vote in her life?" "You needed that?" she asked. "Apparently," he said. "I needed to know that you weren't here because you were afraid of what would happen if you weren't. I needed to know that if you stayed because you decided to." She looked at him in the dark library, with the ancient oak beyond the window, and the thread between them resonant and real. "I have decided," she said. "I keep deciding every day. This morning, I decided again." He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said, "May I—" "Yes," she said before he finished. He raised one hand and touched her face, very gently, with the back of 2 fingers against her jaw, and she felt the heat of it everywhere. Not just where he touched her, but through the thread, lighting it like a lamp lit from the inside, warmth cascading through her sternum and into her chest and down her arms, and she heard the sound he made, low and barely contained, the sound of his wolf finally permitted to say yes. She leaned into his hand. He exhaled. I have been sitting very still, he said, for 5 weeks. I know, she said. I could see it. Was it? He stopped. Did it help? The distance. Yes, she said honestly. It told me things. It told me you were capable of it, that you could want something and not take it. She paused. That was the variable I was missing from the arithmetic. He looked at her with gold eyes in the dark. Did the calculation close? Yes, she said. The answer settled between them like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting a long time. He was still holding her face with that careful, almost reverent gentleness, and she was leaning into it, and the thread between them was humming now, warm and live and real. The way her wolf had apparently been trying to tell her something for 5 weeks without her knowing the right language to receive it. There is something I have to tell you, he said. The mate bond, she said. He went very still. I worked it out 3 days ago, she said. The thread, the way I can find you in the palace, the way I feel it when you're in distress during the war council, not the content of the meetings, just the edge of your stress, pressing through the connection like a tide coming in. She looked at him steadily. I am a village Omega with no house and no special knowledge of court custom, but I have been a healer for 9 years, and I know the difference between ordinary attachment and something ancient happening in my sternum. He searched her face. Are you? I am not afraid, she said. I want to know what it means, what it asks, what we would... She paused. I want to know before anything permanent happens. Because I said I would require information before opinions, and I am holding to that. Yes, he said. He lowered his hand, but she caught his wrist and held it. And something moved through his face that was not quite relief, but was the shape relief makes when it arrives somewhere it did not expect to be welcome. Tell me, she said. He told her. All of it. The mate bond, its stages, its permanence, what claiming meant and what it did not mean, and the difference between the two, the way it would settle between them if they chose it, and the way it would not disappear if they didn't. The way his wolf had known in the receiving hall, while he himself was looking at a map and thinking about the northern pass, and believing himself to be a sensible person, making sensible decisions about an unremarkable situation. She listened to all of it. The claiming is a choice, she said when he finished. Yes. Not just yours. Never just mine. She was quiet for a moment, holding his wrist in the dark, the ancient oak behind the window, the warmth between them steady and patient. Not tonight, she said finally, but not never. Something in him settled, deeply, visibly, the way a man settles when something he has been carrying for a long time is gently, carefully, placed down without breaking. Not tonight, he agreed. She looked at him. You sat down, she said. Your wolf, in the receiving hall. You said it sat down and refused to move. Yes. And you turned around. Yes. Because of that, because your wolf decided. Because my wolf recognized something, he said quietly, that I had not yet had the sense to look for. She thought about this for a moment, about the word recognized, about the difference between choosing and finding, about the fact that he had stood in a receiving hall with his back turned to 50 women being dismissed, and his wolf had sat down in his chest like a stone, and he had turned around, and she had been standing at the back of a line doing arithmetic and not hoping for anything. Your wolf has better instincts than you, she said. Significantly, he said. She almost laughed. She felt the edge of it. A real laugh. the kind she rarely had, the kind that requires genuine surprise and genuine ease, and the conviction that being found funny is not a debt that has to be repaid. "Thank you," she said, for turning around. "Thank you," he said, for missing the carriage. She held his gaze for a long moment in the library, with the thread between them warm and real and unhurried, and she thought about the woman she had been in the receiving hall. Practical, arithmetic running, expecting nothing, protecting herself from the cost of expecting something. And she thought about this, here, now, and the calculation was still closed, and it was still correct. And she was still deciding, and she was going to keep deciding. Every morning she woke in this palace until deciding became simply being. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed, and the day after. Outside, against a sky going slowly from black to deep blue at the edge, where dawn was beginning to feel its way in, the ancient oak stood in the garden exactly as it had stood for longer than the palace. Longer than most things. Permanent in the way that things are permanent when they have already survived everything that tried to move them. The wolf at her door did not scratch or whimper. He did not demand. He simply lay down across the threshold of the library, large and warm and patient, and breathed the slow, deep breath of something that has been running for a long time and has finally found the place it was always trying to reach.